Welcome back to our continuing investigation into the Rendlesham Forest Incident. Today the investigation team are James Worrow, John Burroughs and Simon Holland. All three of us are actively investigating what really happened at Rendlesham Forest. In this film we will take a close look at the work of scientist Andrew Pike and show a funded, in-depth investigation took place on the phenomenon located in Rendlesham Forest by Andrew Pike, a qualified astrophysicist, and his team. Could it be that Pike's work was included in the UK MOD report into UFOs, Project Condign?
These things are real, they're here, this is happening now.
Our night that we went out there, they were blasting the phenomenon with EM frequencies from Bowsy through the tunnels into the forest. Because those blue lights that we saw, plasma's being targeted by lasers. They were generating the phenomenon, which was probably what they were hitting was the actual phenomenon, the exposure, what they created from blasting this energy.
They got immediately merged into UFOs, and I'm not sure what UFOs are, but these aren't spacecraft. These aren't extraterrestrial.
We have now released Land Quick Strike. Repeat, we have now released Land Quick Strike.
Andrew Pike stated that he was working on an officially funded plasma physics project during the time of the Rendlesham Forest Incident. This was a study of ball lightning, natural plasma glows, earthlights and similar phenomenon. Plasma is the fourth state of matter, where atoms have been split up into their positive nuclei and negatively charged electrons. It's vital to know that if you pump enough energy into a gas, it will ionize it and create a plasma. He somehow became embroiled in scientific investigations in Suffolk in December 1980, unaware at the time that a UFO incident was developing. What he thought was a physics investigation was dangerously overlapping into the murky world of ufology. Pike said my two angles of research split into separate projects, but with common grey and very unofficial, almost secret overlaps. In his own words, he said it was a right royal mess from day one. He went on to say, of course we knew nothing of what was to become known as the Rendlesham Forest Incident. We just began by asking around about red glows seen in the sky on an official level. We also asked locals, forest workers and anybody interested in talking.
Hey everybody, welcome back. Welcome to John and James. This is a fascinating episode about Rendlesham Forest with this incredible researcher called Andrew Pike, who wrote and said some incredible things about Suffolk and about the Rendlesham Forest Incident. James Worrow, I mean, who is Andrew Pike? How did you meet him? What do you know about him?
Well, as far as I know, Andrew Pike, he's a qualified astrophysicist. He's also a writer and broadcaster, and he specialises in astronomical anomalies and the history of science.
John, so I mean, so why do you think this Andrew Pike guy was involved, you know, in Suffolk and Rendlesham? What was he doing there? What was your connection with Andrew?
One of the things that I found out was the fact that he actually was on a funded project, which he got very upset about when it was talked about one time on a radio show that I was involved with, where it was mentioned that it was an MOD funded project. And in fact, Nick Pope chimed in too about that. But somebody funded him to be down there investigating the phenomenon in the area. And they not only funded it, but he was down there during our event. And that's what was even more interesting. Not only was he studying a known phenomenon down there that was funded, but he was actually down in the area during our event, and was actually later on, when I discussed with him privately, he actually was involved in some stuff that was going on during our event that may have led to some of what happened. So the guy was down there, and the people attacked this, it was in his own words. He put it in his book exactly what was going on, and he even called it the murky world of ufology being combined with physics. And one of the things that's interesting about what we're looking at is how this phenomenon affects physics. So he even called it the secret world of that stuff. So the government was clearly studying it. They were testing technology down there, and they had Andrew Pike was down there in the middle of all this. So he plays a key part in all of this. Never mind the fact just overall that it clearly shows that UAPs have been and are probably still being studied and utilized in weaponization.
Andrew Pike was especially interested for his investigation into what John Burroughs had encountered. He said, "I like the details given by Burroughs for several reasons. Perhaps the best reason is Burroughs was pretty much left alone and was one of the few who did not get taken away by the Air Force Office of Special Investigations or similar agencies for a hypnotic drug-induced interrogation. Much of what Burroughs has said through the years is, in my opinion, far clearer and pure to the actual events." This is what John Burroughs told me. He told me how he had to walk quite a way until he came into a clearing in the Rendlesham Forest. It was then, he said, he saw an object, as he puts it, which all three also saw: Burroughs, Penniston and Cabansag. However, he says that all three witnesses saw the object a little bit differently, which might be because they were at different distances or might be due to other effects, which we will explore.
Oh, that's really interesting point Andrew made there, that a number of you on the same nights, seeing the same things, came away with different impressions of what you saw. Not describing what you exactly saw, John, but why do you think there was different perceptions?
Well, that's part of the reason why in this film we ask, was his work included in Project Condign? And when you go into Project Condign, and even going further with other people in the United States that we'll address later down the road in some of these films that we're doing, they were looking at the effects that people had when they were in close proximity to this phenomenon. And what I find interesting is one of the biggest arguments by everybody, including the debunkers, the skeptics, and even in ufology itself, is they want to argue about why people saw things differently. Well, if you look at the Condign report, and if you look at the studies that have been going on, including 50, I believe it was 58 papers that was presented to Senator McCain's committee, when you get close to this phenomenon, it has EM frequencies and fields that can affect your perception. In fact, based off of this, there was actually work done in Canada by a guy named Pet Persinger that worked on what he called the God's helmet. And they furthered that work also, where when you're affected by this EM frequencies and stuff, and you get close to this proximity of these frequencies, which in Condign talks about what this phenomenon emits, it will cause your perception. It'll change your reality. It'll cause perception differences depending on, the person. And what people don't really understand is each individual can be affected differently. So three of us could be lined up looking at something the same distance and everything else, but because of our DNA, we could perceive it completely different just off the frequencies.
And all your personal testimonies are completely valid because that's your personal reality. James, I mean, what do you know about how humans can be affected by these kind of extremely strong fields and frequencies? Have you know about that?
Yeah, well, looking at the history of technology through the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, even up to present day, I think what we need to concentrate on are microwaves and how microwaves affect the mind. Epidemiological surveys have found that microwave radiation not only causes human fatigue, headaches, excitement. Maybe that's why certain animals react to this microwave radiation. They can affect your dreams, and they can also cause memory loss. Not only that, if you're close proximity to these microwaves, they can also cause heating of the skin, like you would cook something in a microwave, and that can cause damage. And it can also cause allegedly can also cause problems with the hippocampus in the brain, and it can also affect the heart. So when we're trying to establish what was affecting those members of the services at the time, I think we really need to focus on microwaves. That will probably quite possibly open up a Pandora's box into what was going on there, how microwaves may also interplay with what we call ball lightning or light phenomena, because apparently these balls of light and even ball lightning, apparently it can absorb microwaves and hold them there. Now, if you're using, for instance, pulsed microwave weaponry, then potentially these things can last for a lot longer than they would normally. And it also led me to wonder whether or not what Colonel Hall actually saw, the pulsing of the ball of light that was in the forest, was actually being caused by the pulsed microwave effect.
Well, you can't. I mean, but we're not talking about the type of energy in a microwave oven. Either a natural phenomenon, an enormous earth force, or a weaponization of a microwave, emitter for whatever purposes. You're talking about vast amounts of power, the kind of power that damaged John's heart. It's not just a bit of superficial skin heating. Whatever it was that they were exposed to, man-made or not, the energy levels must have been tremendous.
Can I add a couple of things to that before James? Because one of the things that keeps coming up on our series that somebody keeps chiming in and saying that other people other than myself were not injured. Well, let me go into a couple of people that have had injury issues. A lot of people say that Peniston wasn't. Well, he was. And he said it in his own words. When he testified at the citizens' hearing that Steve Bassett held in Washington, D.C., he was grilled by a senator by the name of Mike Gravel. And you could go back and look at our testimony. And he openly admitted that he had heart issues and other issues coming from the encounter, but he also was being treated by the VA at that particular time for those issues. And then Adrian Bustinza also was injured, and he was with me on night 3 when he got close to it and is getting disability also from the VA for that. So clearly, whatever we encountered out there over those 3 nights caused biological effects on us. And if you look in the Condon report, which a lot of people poo-poo or overlook, that goes into these different frequencies that the author wrote about. And most people don't want to actually acknowledge the guy was an engineer. So he understood. It wasn't just some guy doing research, just a novice. This guy had a background in technology and everything else, and he worked for the Marconi Company. So this guy knew exactly what he was looking at, what he was looking for, and he peppered this all through the Condon report, including the effects. It's in the Condon report how this could affect you and what it would do to people that got close to it and the witnesses or people that had encounters with it.
You are not alone. You and your fellow experiences at Rendlesham, there have been many service people throughout the world probably, but definitely in the US, who have come forward with injuries. So, I mean, people have been exposed to this type of effect.
One of them technologies, as I just tried describing, is pulse wave high power microwaves. In the military report I have in front of me, they've been in development for over 30 years. Now, this report comes from 2012. They've been in development for over 30 years, and since then they've had significant advancements in the size, weight, and power of the weapon. These weapons started as large ground-based systems, but in 2012 the technology had advanced to the point where they could place it on an airborne platform. And this may have also been something that they were alluding to in the Freedom of Information Act that John requested through the MOD on future platforms. These high-power microwaves also provide an opportunity to revisit old nuclear targeting strategies, counter-value strikes. And we also need to mention, back in 1984, there was allegedly microwaves being trained on peace protesters at Greenham Common. A lot of their as I say, injuries and a lot of the people that were involved in it were being describing symptoms as fatigue, memory loss, skin blisters, nausea, vomiting, disorientation.
Can I add a couple of things to Greenham Common? They were protesting because they were going to put cruise missiles there that were going to be nuclear tipped. Now, what I want to bring up, breaking news. Okay, Love Top Secret loves, and I'm sure somebody from that thread will watch this. They've got a new thread, and they're revisiting the Rendlesham incident, and they're focusing on the lighthouse. Now, what's interesting is there's a big argument. It's back in the news again, and Above Top Secret of were we fooled by the lighthouse? Well, there's a couple of things that I want to add to their little thread. The lighthouse, there's a lot of people saying it didn't play a part in it, and there's a lot of people saying it did. Well, it actually did play a part. And the interesting part is that James Worrow did this research and found out about the radar systems that were developed off the death ray. First of all, the death ray was what they were testing and working on. They developed radar based off of that. They had the original radar system down there at the nest. What was it called? The black. What was it, James? The black
tower.
The black tower that was still active. Yeah. Was still active during our incident. That was hooked up through the lighthouse, through cables and a LAN system, and the lighthouse was actually being utilized to beam EM frequencies into the forest. Now, one of the interesting things is about that is Andrew Pike told me that during the event on night 3 that they were beaming EM frequencies, which, by the way, these generators they were utilizing were classified by the Thatcher group. Margaret Thatcher, the prime minister, had them classified after News of the World broke that they were actually beaming EM frequencies from these generators into this phenomenon, where this phenomenon energy field was known to exist. So when you get into this, I find it interesting that they want to, like I said, cherry pick data. Yes, we found evidence the lighthouse was evolved, but not the way it was presented as we were fooled by this beacon. But those frequencies could affect the actual surroundings and how you perceive things and how it affected you. Mm-hmm. You know, and the other interesting thing about all this is that when you add this all up, that place was a hotbed for technology, new technology that was coming off the drawing board that was being tested. And partly because the United States had put a moratorium and shut down a lot of that stuff because of MK Ultra that was found existed, was being utilized by the CIA, and it was all transferred by contracts over to the United Kingdom, and Marconi Company was the lead agency that was working on all this right outside the back gate of Woodbridge.
And I just need to also mention during the 70s, it's well known that the Soviet Union were using microwaves on a US embassy that was also that was causing, effects on members of the staff there. And it wasn't until these members of staff were assessed that they came to the conclusion that they were being affected by microwave, non-ionising microwave radiation. That was during the 70s. Now, obviously, whatever our enemies do, we have to do, and we need to do it better. Not only that, but we also need to understand the physics behind that to be able to counteract any adversary wanted to use that against us. Now, SRI, in February 1980, a year before the Rendlesham Forest Incident, actually published a paper on the effects of non-ionising radiation on humans. And within that, they actually suggesting field testing.
Burroughs explained that they got pretty close, and although he was not able to make out a solid metallic object in the way that Penniston did, he could see what he thought were legs at the base which were touching the ground. In view of some of the UFO cases that this team have recently explored, these legs might have been similar to rod-like extrusions which appear below vortex phenomenon rather than solid metal. The object that Burroughs saw also appeared to have a bank of lights. It was these lights which threw off an image of a craft. However, he makes a point that at his distance he was unable to make out anything hard or metallic in the object. While he was close to this phenomenon, everything seemed and felt different. The sky did not even seem the same. He felt everything seemed slower. Once the object was gone, suddenly everything was familiar again and back to normal. This was interesting because at once it seemed similar to the stories we had already unearthed about strange electromagnetic clouds engulfing ships and planes, like the 1904 encounter with a ship at Philadelphia, 40 years before the so-called Philadelphia experiment, the Bruce German encounter, and of course the Philadelphia experiment itself. All of these incidents had strange detachments from reality with an effect that suddenly ended. Moreover, look at this. This is a leaked drawing to Sky Crash. It does look like an electromagnetic effect, and we will look closer at this strange effect when we examine the effects of electromagnetic fields on the human brain.
John Burroughs, have you come across stuff which, has to be kept secret because it's an advantage?
Well, first of all, go back to World War II. Right after World War II ended, what happened? There was a race between the Soviet Union and the Americans to get all the Nazi scientists on board.
Right.
And a lot of them had committed horrific war crimes. And, they tried to poo-poo it and blame it. They were told to do it or forced to do it through Adolf Hitler. Right. But they did. But both countries overlooked the suffering that was put down on their own soldiers and the Jewish population and everything else. So there's always been a race for the top minds of the world and the advancement of technology. So, yeah, I've come across technology that's been classified. I've seen it in operation. And I'm also aware that if you go, all you have to do is do FOIA. I did one with the MOD, and one of the questions I asked about were they developing weapons off of UAP technology, and they basically confirmed that they were, but they couldn't divulge any of what they were doing or who was involved or anything else because it would involve national security. It's a different word in the UK, but the United States loves national security. So they hide everything. Now, tidbits of it eventually will work its way into the white world. But here's the problem that they kind of have. Some of the brightest minds, especially today in today's world, don't want to get caught up in the murky soup of the black world. More and more of these scientists don't want to be involved in secrets that are being held from society. But eventually a lot of them get drawn in one way or another. But the idea is, yes, they use national security. They use it all the time. You just have to look at the FOIAs that different people have done, including myself, to see that they tie this up. And the biggest excuse is just exactly what was said in the response back to me, was that would give an advantage to the adversaries, like the Chinese and the Russians and other countries. Right. And we have to be the one that has the technology first, because that gives us more power.
It was also interesting that Burroughs made the point that suddenly he noticed the lighthouse beam and the sky was back to normal. But then they saw the object again in the distance. It was at this point they chased the object for about an hour and up to an hour and a half. It seems clear that there was no confusion with the lighthouse, which we have seen simply does not cause these electromagnetic effects anyway. Although Burroughs was unclear whether a solid object existed, he was sure it was technological. He was also unsure whether the government would have developed such technology in 1980. It would be hard to believe that they had the capabilities and technology to do what went on that night. If we have far advanced technology, then we've been lied to for years. John Burroughs is also surprised that the Rendlesham Forest Incident happened over 3 nights. Is that significant? This encounter seems to have had a really deep impact on Burroughs because he starts to question reality, unsure what to believe in, and why the government handles UFOs in such a way. Burroughs is really interested to know why it is as it is, and is very concerned that nothing is done by governments.
John, you got up and close and personal with definitely a UAP, and it was powerful. It was it seemed to have intelligence. It moved through the forest in a way. But that's amazing technology. Ours or non-human technology.
But
that needs to be investigated.
Think about this, Professor. How many people, James included, his family, have had an encounter with something like this and walked away a changed person? They have a profound need to figure out what we're dealing with, what they encountered, what's going on, and just so many things that are controlled and manipulated by our governments, that on social networks and everything else. I just firmly, and that's why I think this is what we're doing is good. And I wish more people would join in our conversations and help us going forward. We would love to bring some people that understand this better on. We'd love to interview some people as far as it's real. Christopher Mellon says it's real. Other people that have been involved in this, including scientists, say it's real. But that's where they stop. It's like what Bigelow said. We're going to acknowledge something's going on, but then we're not going to go into what it is. We're not going to go into in depth or get the general knowledge out, which goes back to the last segment about how they keep all this stuff locked down and classified. But ultimately, it's real, it's taking place, and it's being utilized for weaponizations, and it's caused adverse effects on the general public, including the military. This is tedious work, folks. This isn't like take a look at one thing and say, hey, we figured this out. This is tedious work, and James has spent hundreds of hours going through documents and looking for tidbits of information. And not only Andrew Pike's book, there's a lot of people, that's a lot of reading to take, and you have to have a technical background somewhat, or be willing to address it by looking at it and researching what's said in the book, just like Condign itself. It's not something that you can read in one sitting and read it and totally understand it, but there's a plethora of information out there in these documents and everything else that are declassified that paint a picture of what the governments, especially like the UK and the United States, have been working on, are working on, and want to advance going into the future, and how all this technology is being developed off of different phenomenons out there, including the UAP technology, the phenomenon itself.
Well, that's the thing as well. There's not necessarily just one answer to this phenomena. It looks like there could be a multitude of answers to what people are actually witnessing. Now, are they all linked together, or are they separate incidents that come under an umbrella of sorts? Like a pack of Smarties. They're all Smarties, but each one's a different colour.
I agree, James. And the interesting thing about this is all we're focusing on it basically is the weaponization of technology off of what a UAP is described in different reports to include Project Condign. There's more than likely other intelligences out there, in different, we call them civilizations because of how we address ourselves. But that doesn't mean that what we're dealing with is biologically like us. It could be a lot of different types of phenomenon out there that we're interacting with. I mean, recently it's coming out more and more. There's just this report came out, and I just read it. I didn't read the report, but the headlines that's causing a lot of attention right now, that there are aliens. They call them aliens walking among us, and that's something that's hit the internet this week hard. Well, Bigelow addressed that on 60 Minutes. They're here, they're real, okay? But exactly what is here? What are we looking at? Well, clearly one of the things that's here is this UAP phenomenon. They're studying it. They're working on it. And it just gets overlooked because, unfortunately, it's what Christopher Green said back in Mirage Man, the book. He said the public's been conditioned a certain way to look at what UFOs are. And that's not what we're dealing with. And eventually, if the truth ever were to come out, people would realize it differently. But probably since War of the Worlds, it's been presented in a certain way. And it's really hard for people to break that stigma on just really what we're dealing with.
Yeah, what you're referring to there is the Michael Masters cryptoterrestrial paper that he published about 4 or 5 days ago. It seems to be that he's suggesting this as a possibility, as form of conversation. He's not saying this is, we have proof that this is what it is, but through a process of theory and discussions and looking through lots of evidence, he's basically writing this paper as a conversation piece. So it can be discussed by scientists, and it can, remove that stigma whereby scientists look at that. Oh no, we don't want to talk about that. And he's trying to open up the conversation, which is great. That's exactly what we need, conversation. Instead of everyone pointing at each other saying that can't be right, because this happened, because that happened. Let's just have a conversation about it.
Sure, but conversations are great. We're doing it right now. But here's the problem. We have uncovered a lot of data that supports what we're talking about. And what I'd like to see more of is data coming out and more FOIAs being centered on these governments on exactly where things are going technology-wise. That's where the MOD shut me off when I started zeroing in on technology and the development. They didn't care if I asked them what they held on aliens or UFOs, but they did cut me off when I started getting into the technical part of it and how they've developed, what they're utilizing to develop this. It's real. I mean, Mellon, in our opening little intro we have, they're real. They're here. Bigelow, he's been involved in these projects. They're real. They're here. The question is, what is it? What are we dealing with? And until we can break the stigma of exactly what it could be, because I don't know exactly what it is. I can tell you what I've read in these declassified documents, what little tidbits the government submitted to in FOIAs, and the Project Condign report that's been released, plus some of this other stuff that Arrow has worked on and stuff. But the people that are out there pushing this, for whatever reason, put off and those guys have been neck deep in this for decades. So they know something's going on too. But one of their objectives is to develop technology off of it. Now, is it weaponization? Yeah, because you could say that they looked at Stargate. Put off ran Stargate. That was being utilized as a weapon. It was being utilized to spy on our enemy, okay? Because our enemy was doing it. And Thomas Bearden, if you go back in time, and that's why I always say history is important, Bearden realized way back in the 80s the advancement of what the Soviet Union was working on as far as in this area, in this technology area. So it's there, but until we can get more people to take it serious and start researching and have an open dialogue about it, it's going to be hard to advance the general public to really understand what we're dealing with.
And the UFO community aren't really helping, to be honest, to be very bold. I mean, I think they have a very set agenda of what they hope or even believe that they will find. And I think there's, as you've just said, it's a lot of things. It's a tube of Smarties. We have to look at every case individually. We have to look at the physics. We have to look at the science behind it, because, DARPA and people, they're looking at the physics and the science. So if we want to have any disclosure or come to any conclusions of what's out there, we have to actually be open-minded and look at all the facts.
I agree. And look at what Nolan and Green and those guys have been working on. They're looking at the physical effects on the human body. Okay. And the fact that they've studied different people that have had these encounters, taken their DNA, they were looking at the effects on the mind itself. Well, they weren't just doing that because they were government contractors or work for these agencies. They were looking at it to weaponize it, to utilize it for, as they'll say, the betterment of us, America, United Kingdom and stuff. But there's more to it than just that. But where I'm going with this is that they're clearly studying this phenomenon, this in Project Condign. I mean, we're going to address the papers going forward, and that we've also uncovered evidence that Hal Puthoff ran a similar program that we'll talk about later, and he talked about this in his own words, that the DOD hired him and some other people to analyze all the research that's been put together over the years, about these different encounters and what UAPs are. And I personally visited Hal Puthoff in Austin, and his office is wall-to-wall books on this phenomenon, what we're dealing with, not just what they're calling UAPs, but all aspects of what's going on with us as a society, as the effects on us and everything else. So this is really going on, and people may not like it. I mean, they call it pseudoscience and stuff. But if you just go back and look at Star Trek in the 60s, a lot of what was talked about then, which was being presented to the public through think tanks, because James and I have uncovered a lot of NASA think tank stuff that speculated on where we're at today 20, 30 years ago, and how this advancement of technology would affect humanity and how it would advance, period. So it's clear that this is all being studied and worked on. And the biggest danger right now, the Pope was just at the G7 conference today, was warning mankind that it's funny. It's just like the movie Angels and Demons, where they talk about science and faith coming together, but science was a threat to faith. He was warning the seven leaders, about the dangers of AI and where it could take us as a society. And that probably AI, generated, can you imagine what it could do for weaponization, on being able to control these weapons and everything else? Never mind the fact that if they can actually find a way to take human consciousness, and have it go directly into AI, not type it in through code, but be able to capture consciousness itself and utilize it in AI.
Andrew Pike wrote in the conclusion of his book, The Rendlesham File, Britain's Roswell, the answer to the Rendlesham Forest Incident appears to depend on whether a nuts and bolts craft existed at all, the area's geophysical features, and the history of secret experimental research. Whereas sightings involving unidentified aerial phenomenon, UAPs, are regularly reported in an area known for its natural balls of light, such as Earth lights and plasma-like effects, there was certainly unusual, intense activity during the Rendlesham Forest Incident. It also appears that a general increase in activity has been occurring since the time of World War II and the development of microwave-based radar and other research in the Suffolk area. This has been supported by similar trends in other areas involving radar and microwave communications. This does not appear to be a coincidence. A similar situation occurred back in the 1950s, when ufologists were regularly spotting the U-2 spy plane, causing the US to relocate it. Andrew Pike says, in conclusion, I believe microwave science fits the data well to enhance what might have been otherwise just another outbreak involving balls of light in Suffolk.
So it's really interesting Andrew Pike was actually in the Suffolk area. As John Burroughs said, it's even more interesting that he was there at the time of what became the Rendlesham Forest event. A bit of a coincidence. But James Worrow, why is Suffolk, England, a small county in the eastern part of England that happens to have Bentwaters and Woodbridge, but also what's special about Suffolk? I mean, why do you think Andrew Pike was there? What else has been going on in Suffolk over the time?
Well, Andrew Pike alludes to the fact that this particular area has certain geophysical qualities that seem to give rise to things such as earthlights, or what some people describe as balls of plasma. He was looking at it from a natural phenomena, and as he suggests, when he got there, he was trying to look in these natural phenomena, but everyone kept talking UFOs, and he was trying to do one study, but someone kept tapping him on the shoulder, literally, witnesses talking about other things, and this is where he said, there was a bit of a mixture between what he wanted to study and what other people were telling him. That's from his point of view, and again, looking at that subject myself and these balls of light, that's where I was looking at the effects that microwaves have on these balls of light, and how some of these balls of light exist within, when you see them in ball lightning, for instance, and how they're there 1 minute and they're gone, and some of the movements that they make. How do you sustain one of these balls of light to monitor it, to maybe examine it? You literally bombard it with high powered microwaves. Then you can study it further. Rather than it being there 1 minute and being gone, you'll sustain it. You can possibly see where it tracks, maybe using other methods to study it, using LiDAR maybe from above.
James, what about lasers?
Well, yeah, again, if the argument is as well, if you using a laser and you target our plasma, it's similar to what microwaves do. It holds the energy, and it builds up and builds up and builds up where it can't, and eventually it will burst like a balloon, and all these mixed frequencies will literally fall to gravity, basically come out the bottom of it.
Isn't that what Halt said he saw? There was blue lights, there was lights there, and then all of a sudden they exploded into smaller lights.
Yeah,
okay?
Yeah, that's correct.
Now, and one more thing before, because I want to bring this up. What did Wynn Keach say? If you're beaming it with radars, it could actually control and bounce them around also. So you could use radars and lasers to affect these plasmas, right?
Let me just have a bit of basic science. I mean, plasma is just the fourth state of matter. It's just normal. In our atmosphere, it would just be the normal air in our atmosphere. And as James absolutely correctly says, any energy, microwave energy, top. Laser energy, excellent. What you're going to do is actually ionize, that is, separate protons and electrons into this unassociated state. And so, yeah, absolutely, continuous wave radar. We know that continuous wave radar can have a side effect of ionizing small balls, Foo Fighter balls of plasma in the sky, and so can lasers. We see it every day. Astronomers use a guide star. They produce a plasma ball above the telescope for their optical guidance mirrors by laser energy, by three or four focus beams of laser to a central point, a focus point, boof, and you have a ball, and it's always spherical. Ball lightning, ball plasma. Yeah, no, absolutely.
James discovered that these plasmas could be used as tracking plasmas. So you could create this effect in the sky and control these plasmas through around the area and track things. And one of the things that Wynn Keach talked about in our book was the fact that they were using this technology to bring down a Russian satellite, and that a Russian satellite actually was brought down during our event. So you have these plasmas that can be utilized. Now think of it this way. You learn how, because think of countermeasures that we know exist for sure. They can go and put these airplanes, the aircraft carriers, they have them, the Navy, the Air Force, where they're called jamming planes. They go up into the air and they actually jam frequencies and radars and everything else. Now imagine if you could create these effects that we're talking about through these planes, and something else that most people didn't even consider in 1980 or even today, and it's been hinted at by the group that's been out there, Christopher Mellon's group, I call it, that the satellites would play a part in this. So they could utilize all this technology to use countermeasures and different effects, including jamming radars, affecting radars and what they think they see, and even what you visually see, especially like if I'm a pilot, my radar goes wacko with something on it, and then I see something with my own eyes, but am I really seeing what I think I'm seeing? But it's being utilized not by another fighter jet, or maybe it is, or is it being created by a different aircraft that's completely immersed and undetectable by radar that's creating these effects? Now remember, the Air Force, our Air Force, kept the F-117 around and have been utilized some of these aircraft to be utilized to be flown like drones. Now imagine if you can have a drone or several drones or a fleet of drones in the air that could create these effects. But the biggest question is, and I get back to what you guys are talking about, is what exactly is a UAP? No one's ever been willing to talk about that. The debunkers don't, the skeptics don't, and anything else. The closest we've come to a report that's been released so far is Condign, that talks about the characteristics of what a UAP is, and that it's real, it exists, and it's intelligent in nature. So not only are we creating these effects, but what are we doing with these UAPs that are natural? And as far as how are we utilizing them, and are they even capable? Can we communicate with them? Can we utilize them to do something that we want them to do? Because there's been talk now about communication abilities.
For over 40 years, John Burroughs has sought answers. He went as far as issuing a Freedom of Information request to the British Ministry of Defence. This is John Burroughs' question. Please provide any information and records you have in regard to any consulting or contract work Mr. Andrew Pike might have done with or for the MOD. The UK MOD answer. Section 45B1, Personal Information Redacted, applies to your FOIA request. I can therefore neither confirm nor deny whether the department holds information within the scope of your request. Under Section 10 of the Data Protection Act 1998, we cannot confirm or deny whether the department holds information that would indicate whether Mr. Pike was an employee of the MOD. Your request contravenes Data Protection Principle 1, 2, and 3 and Section 10 of DPA4. Thank you.
I did FOIA on Pike, and the government, the MOD, did not want to acknowledge what they knew about him. And it was also interesting that Nick Pope jumped right in on that and said that, that the government doesn't divulge that kind of information. So it was clear that if whoever funded the project, which I was trying to find out also, they don't want people to know that, and they don't really want people to understand what his work where his work drew into condign or what they were utilizing his work with, whether they grasped it from him directly because his work was being funded by them, or they took it later. But it's clear that his work is important to not only the Rendlesham Forest Incident, but also technology and where it's going forward from 1980 till today.
Yeah, well, I just have to say that we did reach out to Andrew Pike a few times to say that we were doing this subject. I mean, it would be great to have heard from him directly. But Andrew, if you're watching this, please make a statement. We can use it in the future. I think your work is very important, and it's really been a way of us jumping off into what actually happened at Rendlesham Forest. Hey folks, that was really fascinating. We've learned a lot about the Rendlesham Forest incident tonight, and there's more to come because the truth is out there.